Private residence of Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister.
My brother lost his life in the battle against terror. It made a profound impact on me. I have to tell you, it changed my life and steered it into its present course.
This is his first interview since all the wave of uprisings through the Middle East.
Here's Israel. My finger covers it. So it's a tiny country, tiny, surrounded, well, shall we say, living in a very tough neighborhood.
Well, I want to know one thing. What does this mean for the peace process, to the Israelis and the Palestinians?
We want peace more than any other people. We pray for peace, yearn for peace, dream about peace.
When are we going to see a deal? This is a special edition of Piers Morgan Tonight. Prime Minister Netanyahu, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to your residence. I want to start with the appalling events in Japan and get your take on what's happened there and your view of what this means for nuclear energy. Of course, you have 2 reactors in Israel. What do you think?
First, I think it's a terrible tragedy because everybody, I look at the pictures in Japan and I think what every Israeli thinks, and I think what every person in the world thinks. This could be us. Thousands, tens of thousands of people lost their lives. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, perhaps tens of millions, living under a cloud. And I think, first of all, I think about the fortitude of the people of Japan and their suffering, their stoicism, and I admire that. And yet at the same time, I think of their great agony and their anxiety. You know, there's a difference between natural disasters and what we see today. Because you have an earthquake, it passes. But this is different. This is a confluence of a natural disaster and a man-made disaster. And the cloud of radioactivity, the uncertainty of what will happen with it, is the cloud that hangs over the people of Japan, and I think right now hangs over the world. It certainly caused me to reconsider the projects of building civil nuclear power plants. I have to tell you, I was a lot more enthusiastic about it than I am now. In fact, you'd have to give me a very good argument to do it. And fortunately, we found natural gas, so
I mean,
we could make up the difference.
Are you saying that you might actually stop any kind of nuclear energy program in Israel?
We didn't have any civilian nuclear energy. We had some research plans, but not anything on a significant scale. And I don't think we're going to pursue civil nuclear energy in the coming years. I think, you know, we always blame Moses that he was our greatest leader and one of the most gifted people in the world. He brought us the moral code and so on, a belief in one God. But then he was a bad navigator. He brought us to the only part of the Middle East without any gas, without any oil. Turns out he wasn't such a bad navigator because we found some gas offshore. So I think we'll go for the gas, and I think we'll skip the nuclear.
Let's turn to the reason I'm here, the winds of change in the Middle East. You have not given a major TV interview since all this began in December in Tunisia. Let me take you back to December and the events in Tunisia. Did they take you by surprise? What was your immediate reaction? And did you ever imagine that it would create the kind of domino effect we've been seeing?
First, it didn't begin in Tunisia. It began in Tehran a year and a half ago. Millions went to the streets and called for freedom and for democracy in this repressive regime, and they were put down brutally. And then it came back in Tunis. And then from Tunis, it went to Cairo. And then from Cairo, it's going everywhere. Did I expect it at this time? No. Did I expect it at one time, at some time? Yes, because the spread of information technology creates an inevitable conflict. That is, in many ways, the 20th century passed by a lot of the Arab world and the Muslim world. And in comes the information technology of the 21st century and is telling all these people what they missed out on. And this creates the turbulence. Will it end quickly? I doubt it.
I mean, the big question that everyone has been asking repeatedly in the last 2 months is, what does this mean for Israel?
Well, you know, we all have our hopes and we all have our fears. you're looking at this and, you know, two places cheered what was happening in Cairo. One was Washington and its allies, and the other was Tehran and its allies. You know they weren't seeking the same outcome. You know there's a fundamentally different outcome that each was seeking. We had all hoped, and we still hope, that you'll have a democratic transformation, that the Google kids and the Facebook kids, you'll create a Google heaven and a Facebook paradise, and all these people will come to power. That's obviously what people in the West and people in free societies would like to see. It's not clear that that would happen.
What is the nightmare scenario for you?
That you get another Iran. That you had a revolution 5 years ago in Lebanon. 1 million Lebanese, that's equivalent to 20 million Egyptians, walked in the streets of Beirut chanting for freedom, chanting for a secular, reformist, liberal Lebanese state. 5 years later, Lebanon is controlled by Hezbollah, which is controlled by Iran. That's what we don't want to see. We don't want to see this stark medievalism that represses women, that crushes the rights of people, that rolls us back a millennium, that fosters violence, and does everything that we abhor, that it would take over. And I think these are the two poles. One is real democratic change, and the other is a descent to militant Islamism that squashes all freedoms and threatens the peace of everyone.
I remember watching the scenes from Tahrir Square in Cairo when they were jubilant at the thought of Mubarak going, and then we cut to scenes from Gaza where there were equally wild celebrations. And as you say, they were not celebrating the expansion of democratic freedom in Egypt. They were celebrating the overthrowing of Mubarak and the possibility, perhaps, for them to do a similar thing potentially in Israel.
Well, look, Mubarak kept the peace. Egypt kept the peace for over 30 years, and it should be remembered and appreciated. The people in Gaza, those who are affiliated with Hamas, want to see the collapse of the peace and the eradication of Israel. They're supported by Iran that has given them tens of thousands of mortar shells, rockets. They fired already 6,000 rockets and missiles on Israel. So clearly that's not a force for peace or for progress. There are other people in Gaza, but they're in fact subjugated by Hamas. They're not given any choice any more than the people in Iran were given a choice. They're not given a real choice for freedom. They're knocked down. If you can give me a deal, if God came down from the heavens and said, here, I'll give you a choice. Okay, this revolution from the Khyber Pass to the Straits of Gibraltar that is shaking everything in place, except us, because we're an open, democratic, prosperous society. But everybody else is suffering this groundswell, this earthquake, this sandstorm, volcanic eruptions, okay? But it also includes the place where it started, Tehran. And Tehran is transformed into a democratic society. I would say it's worth it, because the Middle East would have a brilliant future.
How unnerved were you?
But there is something that I think, if you want to know the worst outcome, the worst outcome is Iran, where this all started, stays immune to it, continues its repressive, brutal regime, develops nuclear weapons, exports terrorism everywhere, and meddles in the other places and transforms them into so-called Islamist republics, then I'd say that is the worst nightmare.
I mean, there can be no doubt that Ahmadinejad and the Iranians will be looking at this situation, looking for opportunity. There can be no doubt about that. They've made their intentions re-Israel very clear. You must have been pretty disconcerted by losing Hosni Mubarak. I mean, to other people, he may be a dictator. To Israel, he's been a pretty good friend, hasn't he?
Egypt, under Sadat and then under Mubarak, kept the peace, and I think that's something extraordinarily valuable. And I think the first order of the day is to make sure that any future government in Egypt maintains the peace. The fact that we had these 30 years with Egypt, 20 years with Jordan of a real peace is something that I can appreciate. Because
were you sad to see him go?
Well, I was concerned that we might have the opposite of what people want and what we all want. We want to see a democratic, reformed Egypt. I called him once. He didn't return my call. I think he was otherwise engaged. But I can appreciate the fact that Egypt was at peace, and I think our main concern is to make sure that it continues in peace. If it gets to an open, reformist, democratic society, we'll be the first to cheer, because a genuine democracy is a friend of peace. A genuine democracy continues in peace. If it gets to an open, reformist, democratic society, we'll be the first to cheer, because a genuine democracy is a friend of peace. A genuine democracy with all the institutions and the checks and balances of democracy, and a free press.
How fearful are you?
That's peace.
How fearful are you about the Muslim Brotherhood? There are two schools of thought. One is that they are not contaminated with too much fundamentalism. Others think they may well be.
That's what people said about Hamas. That's what people said about Hezbollah. That's what people said about Khomeini. I remember, I gave you the example of the Cedar Revolution, the secular, liberal, open, pro-Western Cedar Revolution in Lebanon. There was a revolution in Iran in 1979, and it began with Shapur Bakhtiar. You remember him? Mm-hmm. He was a Western-oriented, open governance and so on, and he was disposed after 3 months. So the question is, what do you get? Do you get 1979 in Iran, or do you get 1989 in Western Europe, Eastern Europe? In Eastern Europe, they turned towards democracy. In Iran, they turned towards a backward theocracy. And I have not seen a single case in which the Muslim Brotherhood, of its various shades and hues, turns toward the European liberal model. They invariably turn to more closer or identical to the Iranian model.
I'm going to take a short break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about Libya, Gaddafi, and the peace process.
Release the most of my
for those protests, pictures. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's turn to Libya, where it's a pretty disconcerting picture is now emerging, where Gaddafi appeared to be on his way out, but has now fought his way back and appears to be winning the battle against the protesters. No one's intervened on the behalf of those protesters. What do you make of what's happening there?
Well, Gaddafi is no friend of Israel, is no friend of the Jewish people. And I think, as people can see now, he's no friend of the Libyan people. And this is a man who helped explode civilian airlines in the skies. He's fostered terrorism. He's done a lot of terrible things. So I don't think anybody would be sorry to see him go. I wouldn't.
What if he doesn't go?
I think the case of Libya is an interesting place where values and interests cohere. As a leader, you often have a situation where you want to advance a set of values, free democratic societies, and at the same time you may have overriding interests that force you to think otherwise. I don't see that conflict in the case of Libya. I think he could be done away with, and I think everybody would benefit.
I mean, everyone seems to be in agreement that he's got to go. My point is that he's not going, and he's made it clear he won't go, and he appears to be winning his battle by mercilessly killing any protesters. We are seeing something that's bordering on genocide here. Mm. Is there not a moral compunction for America, for the West generally, to get in there and sort this out?
I think it's one of those cases where the moral compunction, as you said, and the interests cohere. I don't think it's a problem, so I wouldn't rule out very firm action against Libya. I think that's something that should be considered seriously.
If America,
I'm sure it is being considered.
If America decided to take military action, would you support that?
Certainly wouldn't be against it.
Moving to Saudi Arabia, some fascinating developments in Bahrain, where it would appear that Saudi forces have been in there. And that's a pretty surprising development, isn't it? What do you make of that?
I don't think it's surprising at all. I mean, I think they're concerned with a possible Iranian takeover of Bahrain, which would put Iran effectively within spitting distance of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, Saudi Arabia is working to protect its own interests, but there is a very large global interest in making sure that the world's oil wells, that the largest reserves of the world's oil supply, do not fall into